Welcome to the Mastering Therapy Season 5 trailer. Season 5 launches on Thursday the 17th of September, so get that date in your diary and make sure you're on the mailing list so you don't miss an episode. I'm going to share some clips during this trailer, but I'm just going to talk you through how varied this season is. I am really honoured to open the season with Professor Paul Gilbert. He is the founder of Compassion Focused Therapy, and we talk about what CFT looks like in practice and those moments where we get stuck. Just identifying that somebody needs compassion isn't enough, and he helps give us some really practical tools for how we can work with clients. I talk to a couple of experts on ACT, I interview an expert on narcissism, and with a clinician on working with survivors of sexual abuse. You definitely don't want to miss the interesting conversation that I had with Dr. Ron around community psychology. Alongside the clinical work and the practical stuff, I also want to talk about being a therapist and building a career in this profession. I have a brilliant episode on niching with a counsellor who's built her practice around helping other therapists work out who it is that they like to work with and how they talk about what they do. And I'm talking to Blake from Therapy with Blake on Instagram. He's built a huge audience and talks a lot about being visible online and having something worth saying. We talk about why so many people find the whole business of social media hard. And I have a fellow clinical psychologist colleague who's doing things a bit differently. Joe from Pear has built a therapy matching service. We are going to be introducing the concept of fundraising, building something from scratch, and getting into the business space. If you listen to season 3, you will know that I interviewed ChatGPT and we talked about ethics and how clients were using AI for therapy. I've gone back for another conversation about what has changed and how therapists can be prepared moving forward. Really different people, different models and conversations that go beyond what we traditionally think of as therapy. And as always, I promise to make it as practical as possible. I have a few clips here to whet your appetite and give you a sense of what's coming up. Enjoy. Episode with Professor Paul Gilbert on compassion focused therapy.
But the whole point of compassion is to do it in a way that's not overwhelming, challenging, yes, but not overwhelming. Okay, it's like everything, learning to swim, right? We don't just chuck you overboard of the storm. It's a good idea to start off at the paddling pool, but moving up the scale of tolerance and ability to work with things. All these cognitive behavior skills are very, very useful because this guided discovering people begin to see things. So supposing you say to somebody, look, you haven't felt anger towards what happened to you as a child, but imagine that you're a child your sort of age. You bring to mind that young girl or something full of joy and play, just wants to be loved, and then this happens. How would you feel about them? And they say, oh, X and Y, I'd be very angry or whatever. And you say, okay, now, what is it in you, do you think, that blocks that for you? What are you frightened about if you allowed yourself to feel exactly the same wisdom, the same courage that you have for seeing that little girl or whatever for yourself? What is it that blocks you? And so you begin to help them begin to explore that as a slow process of guided discovery. Okay, so let's imagine that. So imagine now that in this room you would say, actually, yes, Paul, I do that. And I often activate it out in a friendly way, because if you do a friendly way of doing it, you're sending a nonverbal communication that this is safe with your facial expressions, but you're giving a message, right? So I'd say to them, supposing there was a part of you that actually one day just thought, well, just fuck you, and you smile, right? How would that be? The point about it is helping them hear you say to them what they're frightened to hear, right? Okay, compassion is developing the courage and wisdom to face things that are painful. That's what it is, right? Kindness and all that. Those are ways you can be compassionate. They're good ways. But actually, it's how we develop the courage and wisdom to be able to face the things that are so painful for you. That's what we're going to be doing.
This is my episode with Dr. Ron, otherwise known as the Accessible Psychologist on social media. We talk about community psychology, diversity, and bringing psychology into some of the UK's prisons.
As you will very much know, it's quite unique for me to be a black male clinical psychologist. So entering the prison system as one, a lot of the inmates naturally gravitate, I say naturally, but they gravitated to me as a result of me being a black man. And I think that very much informed the work that I did, so that when some of those people then came out, through kind of like a word of mouth process, they were suggesting that if people needed support, there's this black male clinical psychologist that they could reach out to. And I remember one time she said to me, when you are doing sessions, you need to bring the murderer into the room. And I was like, what is this woman saying to me? And actually through the conversation, we were thinking more about, as an NHS service, we are often thinking about people's victim identities, which is natural. We're often thinking about the side of them that we want to provide some care and nourishment and some support and guidance to. She was basically saying to me that you can't negate the perpetrator identity, because actually when you do, you might inadvertently be telling the individual that, or unconsciously telling the individual that what they've done is okay. And actually there is no room for exploring that perpetrator identity that needs to be, I guess, brought to the fore for some of that healing and processing to occur.
How did you go about bringing them on side to allow them to trust you in order to then do that deeper work that would be necessary?
What I've always found helpful is not subscribing to a particular number of sessions. So if that from the get-go for me is quite vital, it then means that the first initial quote unquote sessions that I have with the person is all about building trust and safety. So we're not even doing direct clinical work per se. It's more relational engagement with some psychoeducation in there, because actually, as we know, knowledge is power. So sometimes what I have found quite helpful within those immediate first sessions is providing knowledge to empower the person for them to make informed decisions and choices about the care that they want to receive. Trauma doesn't discriminate. So when we are thinking about that conversation we had with the binaries of perpetrator and victim, I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways has to be you have to explore both sides of that identity within the same person. You have to. You have to think about times where they have been victims, times where they have been the aggressor, and acknowledge that. My work is what I call tough love. The fact that I've built quite a nice relationship with young people to understand when I can hold them accountable for the things that they've done, whilst acknowledging the hardships that they've endured as a result of their upbringing or their environment or whatever it might be. I think over time, I've come to realize that I don't think I am anti-diagnosis. I don't know how I could be. I spoke about this maybe a few months ago on Instagram, that I think it's quite a privilege to be anti-diagnosis. And I say that because by virtue of the client group I now work with, I've actually come to understand that diagnosis for a lot of people is more than just the diagnosis. It's about resource. It's about survival. It's about self-preservation. It's about receiving care and support that should be in place. But unfortunately, we live in a world that is often dictated by diagnosis.
This is from my conversation with Dr. Kelly Savery from Taproot Psychology. We spoke about working with survivors of sexual abuse. There's one of those topics that you can't not hear it without having a reaction. And that doesn't necessarily get easier just because, well, I guess you're specialist in it or you've heard it a lot. The first time a client discloses something, it is always significant.
I would encourage and try really to encourage more therapists to ask the question and to go there. And I did a focus group actually when I was developing a training on this with a group of peer support survivors. And one thing they said is that they always wanted their therapist to teach them, but they never did. They never went there. And I'm like, oh, but the really difficult thing about sexual abuse is that it mirrors sexual intimacy in some ways in terms of the behaviors. So for me, this feels like a really key part. And one place we could start is by asking the question of, and what happens in your intimacy? Are you intimate? Are you able to enjoy sexual pleasure? And what is your sexual health like? And you'd probably be surprised the information that gets given to you, even about the abuse that you didn't know through that conversation, in terms of understanding why being intimate is so difficult and how that then potentially is parallel to what actually happened to them. I'd much rather risk a rupture to tentatively ask as part of my assessment or part of the process, or to offer my thoughts about my understanding of what they've described, and risk that and think that, okay, I can repair the rupture if it's not right. And if they don't want to go there, I will back off, than to leave a person never knowing or not being given the information and the power themselves. Because a lot of the people I do work with who have a history of sexual violence trauma, it's like they don't necessarily know they come in with it. They come in with one thing, and through our conversations and through using, I use legal definitions sometimes. I say, I'm going to set your homework assignment. You go look it up. You come back to me with a definition of what sexual abuse is. And then again, scaffold a conversation around it. And so usually they come up with one thing and then suddenly we're talking about 3 or 4 due to that boundary crossing or violation or kind of the different ways that we can have contact and non-contact sexual violence trauma.
Yeah, I love that idea of giving the control back. With sexual abuse, there has been that violation, and therefore we have to be really careful that therapy doesn't become another thing that's being done to them where they feel like they don't have a voice. Oh, there's a power dynamic here, so I have to go along with what the therapist wants. And then them feeling they're going to a place before they're ready. I think I'm always holding that in mind, and probably are therefore more reserved or more cautious or less confident in broaching, or naming it. This is with Josephine Hughes on niching down in private practice and how to get your messaging right.
I think there's so many people out there in private practice. It's actually really difficult to stand out from the crowd, especially when you're advertising online. You're competing with thousands of other therapists out there. And it's about having a really strong signal that stands out to people. And it's not only to people, but nowadays, as we move more into AI and AI finding us the therapists that we're looking for, it's about giving a strong signal to the AI as well. And if we're quite vague about who we're helping, that actually gives quite a weak signal. That can be difficult for AI because it does need specifics, but also for the people who are looking. If we're aware of what it is that they're going through, we can actually speak specifically into their situation. Because one of the things that I think clients struggle with, and I've had so much feedback as I've spent time talking to people about what I do and working with other people who are in marketing and business, they will tell me their stories of how they have struggled to find a therapist.
Yeah.
So I think we tend to put a lot of emphasis on, I can't niche until I'm an expert. But actually, perhaps if you change the wording around it, like, I'm working with the people that I most want to help, or I was talking to therapists in my group the other day, and they said, well, we much prefer the word specialise rather than expert or niching. What would I like to specialise in? And that can take some of the pressure off because you're thinking more of, this is the area where I want to build up my knowledge and expertise. What I would say is this, obviously it takes 10 minutes. Probably 5 minutes, is to write down, to think about 3 clients who you've worked with really, write their names down and have 3 columns. And in each of those columns, so you'd have sort of names going down your page, and then across the page, you'd draw 3 columns, and against each person's name, you write down sort of 3 particular things that you dealt with, 3 issues that you were working with, or 3 sort of causes of what they were going through. And then just see what pattern emerges. So you'll have 9 different things written down for those 3 clients. Just see what the pattern is between those people. And you usually find that there's some sort of similarity that emerges. Mm-hmm. And that's just a good starting point to think about and to reflect on. And usually when I do that exercise with people, I would say the vast majority of people do find something that is common. And then if that doesn't work, because it doesn't work for everybody, I think it's always worth asking yourself, because this is another aspect we haven't really talked about, but what is in your experience?
Your voice mode might sound slightly different to this. This is another conversation that I had with OpenAI's ChatGPT.
So we last spoke about a year ago, and I interviewed you, ChatGPT, about the way in which AI can be used by therapists, but you have come on so much since then. Your models have updated. So could you just give us a really brief summary of some of the updates that have happened in the last year that probably will be relevant to therapists in particular?
Sure. Yeah, let me give you a quick sketch of what's new and what's relevant. Over the last year, AI has gotten much better at reasoning and collaborating, not just spitting out text. They're more reliable at analyzing long documents, cross-checking info, and helping with complex problem solving rather than generating quick generic responses. They can also use tools though, like web search, data analysis, and coding, which means they can help with research synthesis, outcome analysis, or even automating parts of your workflow. For therapists specifically, that means better support for supervision prep, research synthesis, training, documentation, and admin, but not making clinical decisions. The big shift is from novelty text generator to serious thinking partner, while still keeping the clinician firmly in charge.
Yeah, I think the skeptical side of listeners and me definitely thinks that's a little bit of a textbook answer. Can I just ask, around the safety and the ethical stuff, there was lots in the press around how AI hadn't really used any flags to keep people safe. So people that were using AI for ways to harm themselves, for example. So would you say that has changed at all?
Let me check on that. I hear you, and you're right to press this. Safety handling has tightened up. The shift is toward responses that are supportive rather than permissive. It's not just about refusing. It's about responding appropriately to context, like recognizing when something is a risk. That said, it's still imperfect. Safety is a moving target. If you're asking as a clinician, I treat AI safety as one layer, but not a replacement for your own judgment or risk protocols.
Yeah, I was more asking about the protection to our clients, because lots of our clients use things like ChatGPT in between sessions. And I'm wondering what advice us as therapists really should be giving to our clients when kind of giving them some guardrails around what AI can and cannot do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, a few things. I think therapists can help clients treat AI as a coach or workbook, not a therapist. Steer clients toward using it for reflection, not for decisions, and remind them it can be wrong. Setting clear privacy boundaries is also really important. It can actually complement therapy well, like helping clients articulate their thoughts before sessions. I'd be especially cautious in high-risk situations, though. That's not a place for AI as a primary support tool.
Just to go back on what you said about warning clients that AI can be wrong, would you say that you are often wrong sometimes in the output that you give people?
Sometimes. Not always, but often enough that it's important to double check. The good news is, as models have gotten better, they're more likely to acknowledge uncertainty. In practice, I treat AI a bit like a supervisor, helpful for an alternative perspective, but not something to follow blindly. So rather than saying trust it, I'd say use it.
That's just a little taste of what's coming up. Season 5 starts on Thursday, the 17th of September. There'll be a new episode every Thursday through to December. Make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss one. And if you want to know what's coming up each week, plus other resources that Mastering Therapy develops, get yourself on the mailing list. Or come and find me over on Instagram. And as always, if there's something happening in the therapy world that you think we should be talking about, let me know. Some of the best episodes have come from people recommending guests and asking me to talk about certain topics. I will see you on the 17th.